Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Guys That Magic. This is Hunter coming at you once again with another deck tech video. We are still in Foundation Land. That is right, we were taking a look at another legendary creature, building a 100 card deck around that creature. You've already clicked on this video, so you know exactly what creature we're talking about. It is the mono black, welcome back, Tinybones. But before we get into this video, I just want to remind everybody to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button, because like 80% of you guys aren't subscribed for whatever reason. We're just trying to make awesome content that you guys enjoy. So yeah, just let us know about that by hitting the like button. So hit it. But yeah, so let's go ahead, dive straight into this deck tech with Tinybones. So the newest Tinybones comes to us as Tinybones Bauble Burglar. It's 1 and a black for a 1/3 legendary creature skeleton rogue. It says whenever an opponent discards a card, exile it from their graveyard with a stash counter on it. During your turn, you may play cards you don't own with stash counters on them from exile, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. It also has another ability. You can pay 3 and a black, you can tap it, each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. I've been looking for my discard commander for a long time now. I know you have Turgid, which is a very, very mean deck. That's more than just discard. That's also causing people to sacrifice things. Then you've got Aclazotz, which I think was a very cool way, and I almost built it. But for a 2-mana commander that helps with discard even more, sign me up. The best thing about Tinybones here is it also is graveyard hate. So discard has always been an effect where, like, that's cool, you discarded a card, your opponent can get it back with reanimation, or your opponent can get it back later if it had, I don't know, flashback. You don't know your opponent's strategies at the time of their discard. But Tinybones says, no, it's exiled. All of your cards that you're discarding are now exiled, and I get to play them whenever I want for the remainder of the game. Those stash counters do not go away. So if Tinybones dies later on, cast them again. The static ability of during your turn, I can cast spells with stash counters. That is still there. Those cards will always have stash counters on them. Whenever, play your opponent's cards. I love it. Let's get into it. So the first 2 cards we are going to be talking about in this deck are Planeswalkers, and of course, Liliana, the queen of discard, is coming here. So Liliana of the Veil, 1 and 2 black for starting loyalty of 3, a +1 that just says each player discards a card, a -2 that says target player sacrifices a creature, and a -6 that says separate all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents of that pile of their choice. Whatever. It's all about that +1. Each player discards a card. We love those effects. We want to see more of the effects of each opponent discarding cards. And then the other 2 is just kind of, obviously, you're targeting one player and going to make their life miserable with the other stuff. Liliana, Wicker of the Dead, is 2 and 2 black for a starting loyalty of 4. +1, each player discards a card. Each opponent who can't loses 3 life. That's just a little bit of bonus. And a -3 that says target creature gets -X till end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard. And a -7 that says you get an emblem that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste. Fantastic ultimate there. But once again, that +1, we're forcing everybody to discard a card, really just allows us to go ahead and play as many things as we want with stash counters on them. Moving on to the creature section of our deck, we will start with some creatures that make mana for us. Cryptghast is 3 and a black for a 2/2 creature spirit. It has Extort. Keep in mind, the reminder text on what Extort does have a white pip, but that is reminder text. It is not an actual activation cost on the card. Therefore, this card is a mono black color identity. I know sometimes if you're a newer player, you don't understand why the difference there. It is just reminder text. Anything inside parentheses there doesn't count towards the card doing the thing on itself. It also says, whenever you tap a swamp for mana, you add 1 black mana to your mana pool. And then, of course, we're adding Leaden Mirror here, too. For 2 mana, it's a 1/1 artifact creature mirror. You can tap it to add a black to your mana pool. The reason I'm adding these in here is because we do have bigger spells later on. Our Commander Awesome coming down at 2 mana, so you're not going to be really needing a lot of rocks, a lot of mana dorks to get our Commander out. But we do have a lot of other cool things that we want to put more mana into later down on the road. And these 2 help that strategy. Moving on to the each opponent discards a card effect. That is right. All 4 of these cards are the exact same mana cost, the exact same power and toughness, and the exact same wording. They're just all named differently. So, Burglar Rat, Elderfang Disciple, Nezumi Informant, and a Virus Beetle all cost 1 and a black. They are all a 1/1, and they all say when they enter, each opponent discards a card. Love these effects, and later down the road I will talk about another card that we can, even though it's a one-time effect, they're useful later. Moving on to some other cards that care about the discard thing is Hostile Investigator, 3 and a black for a 4/3 creature, Ogre, Rogue, Detective. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. It also says whenever 1 or more players discard 1 or more cards, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this card is very awesome because it also gives us card draw in the way of clues, and that's pretty cool. Hypnotic Spectre is 1 and 2 black for a 2/2 creature spectre. It's got flying. It says when it deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. I love that ability there because it kind of just hurts our opponent even more than just, hey, you got to discard a card. Making them discard a card at random has the ability to get rid of a card they really didn't want to discard. The Haunt of Hightower is 4 and 2 black for a 3/3 legendary creature vampire. It's got flying, it's got lifelink, and it says whenever it attacks, defending player discards a card, and then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower. So if our opponent's things are just going into the graveyard from the battlefield, we're getting counters, and if we're just discarding cards, we're getting counters. The Haunt of Hightower is going to be pretty big and swinging in for a bunch of lifelink flying damage. Torok, Dread Cantor, 1 and a black for a 2/1 legendary creature human cleric. It does have a kicker of 2 black mana. It's got protection from white and says whenever an opponent discards a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Torok. And it also says when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. Once again, that random factor really, really hurts our opponents. Moving on, I did mention him at the beginning of the video as a potential commander. Of course, he's got to come in here. So Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal. 3 and 2 black for a 4/4 legendary creature bat god. It's got flying. It's got lifelink. It says whenever it attacks, each opponent discards a card, and for each opponent who can't, you draw a card. And whenever an opponent discards a land card, you make a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. And whenever it dies, you return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. It transforms into Temple of the Dead, which is a land that taps for a black, and you can also pay 2 and a black, tap it, transform Temple of the Dead, activate only if a player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, and only as a sorcery. So, Aklazot's really tough to get rid of. I just love it here. It's a good card. Fell Spectre, 3 and a black, 1/3 creature spectre. It says when it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card, and whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. So just keep making your opponents discard stuff, make them keep losing 2 life. Archon of Cruelty, 6 and 2 black for a 6/6 creature Archon. It's got flying and says whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You draw a card, and you gain 3 life. So as you can see here, this is just doing more than just the discard effect, even though it's also doing the discard effect. It's just so mean here. Rottenmouth Viper is the card I was alluding to earlier when we were talking about all 4 of those cards that did the one-time effect of entering and each opponent discarding a card. Because it is 5 and a black for a 6/6 creature elemental stake. But it says as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of non-land permanents, and this spell will cost 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrifice this way. So if we've done that effect, sacrifice all those creatures. Rottenmouth Viper will be cheaper. It says when it enters or attacks, you put a blight counter on it. Then for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. This card gets out of hand so quickly, it's going to be a problem at the table for all of our opponents. The Raven Man is a great support piece in this deck. It is 1 and a black for a 2/1 legendary creature human wizard. This is the beginning of each upstep. If a player discarded a card this turn, you create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. It also has another ability very similar to our commander for 3 and a black. Tap it, each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. So, yeah. Moving on to some other creatures that kind of just do more than just the discard effect, gives us a little bit more flexibility. We have Sangromancer for 2 and 2 black for a 3/3 creature vampire shaman. It's got flying and says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life. And whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. So just a bit of life gain, so whenever our opponent loses things, whether it be either creatures or in their hand, we're just, gaining some life. Junji the Midnight Sky is 3 and 2 black for a 5/5 legendary creature dragon spirit. It's got flying, it's got menace, and it says when it dies, you choose one. Each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, or you could put a target non-dragon creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose 2 life. So, just a bit of flexibility. Speaking of flexibility, we have Rankle, Master of Pranks. 2 and 2 black for a 3/3 legendary creature, Fairy Rogue. It's got flying, it's got haste, and it says when it deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. You can have each player discard a card, or you can have each player lose 1 life and draw a card, or each player sacrifices a creature. Yeah, this is a great card in this deck. We're just going to be hurting our opponents a lot. And last but certainly not least, we will add the original Tinybones himself. Tinybones, Trinket Thief. 1 and a black, 1/2 legendary creature skeleton rogue. It says at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discarded a card this turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. And for 4 and 2 black, each opponent with no cards in hand loses 10 life. So if you had a Tinybones Trinket Thief commander deck, I think you could swap it out with brand new Tinybones, and you could probably see it do a lot pretty similarly. These last 4 creatures are really just good black creatures. We are in mono black, so of course, just throw them in. Dothy Voidwalker, 2 black mana for a 3/2 creature Dothy Rogue. It's got Shadow. It says if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it. You also tap it, sacrifice Dothy Voidwalker, choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. So just a little bit of extra kind of we want your cards in exile with Dothy Voidwalker here. So Gray Merchant of Asphodel, aka Gary, is 3 and 2 black for a 2/4 creature zombie. It says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. You will be gaining a lot of life because each opponent is going to be losing a lot of life. Opposition Agent, 2 and a black for a 3/2 creature human rogue. It's got flash, and it says you control your opponents while they're searching their libraries. And while an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were any mana of any color to cast them. So once again, very similar to Dothy Voidwalker, we're not letting our opponents do anything. We're exiling all their cards, and we're going to be able to play them from exile. And last but certainly not least, we're adding a brand new big baddie himself, Valgavoth Terror Eater. 6/3 black for a 9/9 legendary creature Elder Demon. It's got flying, it's got lifelink, and it has ward, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. And if a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with Valgavoth. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So if our opponents are playing just instants or sorcery spells, or if things are leaving the battlefield to the grave, if we didn't actually get them to discard something with Tinybones on the field where it's not exiled, it goes to exile and we can just cast those for free. Count me in. All right, time to move on to the sorcery department. We will kick it off with some removal I'm throwing in here. Brand new from this set, Blasphemous Edict. I love this card. It's 3 and 2 black sorcery. You may pay just 1 black rather than pay this spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. Each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. Everybody's comparing this card to Blasphemous Act. We all know that card. It is a fantastic mono red spell. It doesn't care about the 13 creatures exactly, but let me tell you, for 5 mana, having an ability to have everything get sacrificed instead of destroyed is way, way better. And then if there are 13 creatures out of the 4 players on the board at once, which there probably is, well, 1 mana board wipes are fantastic. Toxic Deluge also going in for 2 and a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you pay X life. All creatures get -X till end of turn. You've seen the many ways we can gain life in this deck already, so life is just another resource. Toxic Deluge, get rid of the board. Feed the Swarm, 1 and a black for sorcery. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. These next 3 sorceries are in the discard theme, but they also provide our opponents with some information about our opponents. So Duress, 1 black mana for sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand to the entire table. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Pilfer, 1 and a black, sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. And Thoughtseize, 1 black mana, sorcery. Target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. You lose 2 life. All of these are fantastic because not only are we just making our opponents reveal their hands, so our other opponents see that and they go, oh man, they're going to be a threat when they play that card. Gets the heat off of our back. It's fantastic. And we're doing the whole discard effect. So we can get rid of their best thing and then also play it with a stash counter. Speaking of the discard effects, let's continue on with more sorceries that care about discarding. Vicious Rumors, 1 single black mana. It says it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card, then puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. You gain 1 life. That's doing so much for 1 mana to the entire board. I love this card. Hymn to Torok, 2 black mana sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards at random. Once again, the random effect is fantastic. Rankle's Prank, 2 and 2 black sorcery. Choose 1 or more. Each player discards 2 cards. Each player loses 4 life. Or each player sacrifices 2 creatures. Do them all. Just make it fun. Seeker's Folly, 2 and a black sorcery. Choose 1. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Or creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Bit of flexibility there. I like that. Siphon Mind, 3 and a black sorcery. Each other player discards a card. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. Card draw wins games. Torment of Hailfire. This is not only a discard spell, but this could be your absolute finisher late game. This has won many of games for me in the past, for my friends in the past. I've lost many a games to this card. It's fantastic. For X and 2 black sorcery, repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Depending on how much you put in that X cost, like I said, it can just finish a game. Going on to the instance department of our deck, we are throwing in a lot of removal in this department. I like to think that if we are discarding our opponent's hands, they are only playing the things that they can play, and if they are getting creatures on the board, we want to get rid of those too. So, Deadly Rollick, 3 and a black for an instant, but if you control your commander, you can play it for free. Exile target creature. Infernal Grasp is 1 and a black. Destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Defile for 1 black mana. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp you control. We are a mono black deck. We are going to be casting this for 1 mana, potentially doing -20, -20, depending on the game. Sheoldred's Edict, 1 and a black. Choose 1. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature token, or each opponent sacrifices a planeswalker. Flexibility on this card for each opponent is too good not to put into a deck. And Withering Torment, 2 and a black, instant. Destroy target creature or enchantment, you lose 2 life. The final 2 instants that we are throwing in are just pretty good for our deck. Dark Ritual, 1 black. Add 3 black to your mana pool. Yeah. And Liliana's Triumph. This one actually does go into the theme of the deck. 1 and a black. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. If you control a Liliana Planeswalker, each opponent also discards a card. So yeah, you've seen the 2 Liliana Planeswalkers. Play this after that. Time to move on to the artifact department of our deck. Of course, we are throwing in mana rocks. You saw we didn't really have any mana dorks in mono black, so we're throwing in the rocks. Arcane Signet, 2 mana, tap it, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Felwar Stone, 2 mana, tap it, add 1 mana of any color that a land and opponent could produce. Mind Stone, 2 mana, you can tap to add a colorless, or you can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. Soul Ring, 1 mana, tap it to add 2 colorless. Throne of Eldraine. I love this card in monocolored decks. I said it in the Shrufus Sproutsire. I'm saying it again in this one. 5 mana, legendary artifact. Enters the battlefield, choose a color. Black. You could tap it, add 4 mana of the chosen color. Spend this mana only to cast monocolored spells of that color. You can also pay 3, tap it, draw 2 cards. Spend only mana of the chosen color to activate this ability. Yes, please, do it again. And of course, this is not actually a mana rock, but it does help. It is Jet Medallion. 2 mana, black spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast. We are throwing in the boots, of course. We are trying to do things fast. We are trying to get a bit of protection. So Swiftfoot boots, 2 mana, artifact equipment. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste, equip cost of 1, and lightning greaves, 2 mana. Equipped creature has haste and shroud, equip cost of 0. The last 2 artifacts that we are throwing into this deck are just really good cards for this deck. Get's Grimoire is 4 mana for an artifact that says whenever an opponent discards a card from their hand, you may draw a card. Card draw for their discarded cards is so good. Winter Moon, also a fantastic inclusion in a monocolored deck. For 2 mana, players can't untap more than 1 non-basic land during their untap step. We are going to be a problem, and we're here for it. The next section is going to be our enchantment department. We are throwing in some mean cards. So let's go ahead and get on with these discard effects first. Bandit's Talent, 1 and a black. It's an enchantment class. It says when it enters, each opponent discards 2 cards unless they discard a non-land card. You can level it up for 1 black mana for level 2. It says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. And to get it to level 3, you pay 3 and a black. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. This card's really good in Standard right now. This card's even better in Commander because it's each opponent. So we're going to be drawing a bunch of cards. Court of Ambition, 2 and 2 black. Enchantment, when it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. But if you're the Monarch, instead, each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. Hopeless Nightmare, 1 black mana. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. And then whenever this is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you scry 2. You can also pay 2 and a black to sacrifice Hopeless Nightmare. Painful Quandary is going in this deck. I haven't got a chance to play this card in a while, and I can't wait to put it here. 3 and 2 black. Enchantment, whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless they discard a card. Painful Quandary indeed. Tinybones joins up because, of course, we are in a Tinybones deck. It's got to go in there, right? 1 black mana, legendary enchantment. It says when it enters the battlefield, any number of target players each discard a card. Probably say everybody but us. And then whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under control, any number of target players each mill a card and lose a life. These next 3 enchantments that we're throwing in here, like it when our opponents discard. So Liliana's Caress, 1 and a black enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Megrim, 2 and a black enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card from their hand, Megrim deals 2 damage to that player. And Waste Not, 1 and a black enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, you put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, you add 2 black mana to your mana pool. And whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, you just draw a card. So whatever they do with their discarded card, Waste Not says, I will take advantage of whatever you do. The final 2 enchantments that we are throwing into this deck just are really good black enchantments here. So Black Market Connections, 2 and a black. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you choose 1 or more. You can create a treasure token and lose 1 life. You can draw a card and lose 2 life. And or you can create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. You lose 3 life. And Phyrexian Arena, 1 and 2 black. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Just extra card draw going into the deck. We want to draw as many cards as possible. We want our opponents to get rid of all of their cards. And finally, let's go ahead and move on to the final section of our deck. It is the land department. It's really going to make this deck hum, right? It's a monocolor deck. Come on. It's not going to be that much. Bojuka Bog enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters, you exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Tap it to add a black. Cabal Coffers. You can pay 2. Tap it to add a black for each swap you control. Reliquary Tower says you have no maximum hand size. You can tap it to add a colorless. You've got Castle Lochthwain. It is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swap. You can tap it to add a black. You can also pay 1 and 2 black, tap it, draw a card, and then you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Oh well. Rogue's Passage. Tap it for a colorless or pay 4, tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. War Room, some extra card draw here as well. You can tap it to add a colorless. You can pay 3, tap it, pay life equal to the number of colors of your commander's color identity and draw a card. So just 1 life there. And Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. You can tap to add a color list. You can also pay 2, tap it, choose a color, black. Add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to the devotion of that color. And last, but certainly not least, we're going to be throwing in 28 basic swamps. And that is going to do it. That is my build for Tinybones Bauble Burglar. Comment down below. Did I miss a card that you would have added? Maybe I added a card that you think shouldn't have been added at all. I'm here for your guys' opinions, and I'm listening. Right now in the comments, I see all of those. So let me know. I'm always interested. Let's have a discussion. We like to keep these budgets between $300 to $400. The way I built this, though, I didn't want to just throw in just cards just to get to that budget. So this, at the time of recording, I believe is under 300 bucks. A lot of discard effects, they don't cost that much money. And yeah, it really shows. So you can go, I was thinking about throwing in the One Ring. That's a really good card. I mean, that's expensive. Shieldred, if you have one of those lying around for whatever reason, throw that in here. Just really good black cards if you want. But yeah, this is just my build. So here it is. So my final thoughts about Tinybones Bauble Burglar. I did mention it at the beginning of the video. I think I found it. I found my discard commander. I've been waiting for something that I can really sink my teeth into. And Tinybones, welcome back. You're here for me. You're here in my heart, and I love it so much. I cannot wait to play this with my friends on good old kitchen table magic. Gonna be building this as soon as I get all of my product. So hopefully I open it. You'll see. But yeah, that's going to do it for me today. If you guys liked that video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, so you're staying up to date with everything else that we got putting out. Got so much content coming out all the time. You don't want to miss it. Also, in the description, you will find links to this box field. Look, if you want to see the full deck list, check the description. It's right there. And while you're in the description, you'll find links to all social media accounts. That's TikTok, that's Twitter, that's Instagram. @GuysThatMagic for each one. Follow us on those as well. And on the screen right now, those are all our Patreon subscribers. Thank you guys so much for your added support. It really does mean the world to us. If you guys wanted to check out what they're seeing, which is bonus content that you do not see here on YouTube at all, it's over there on our Patreon exclusive. Check the link in the description as well and consider subscribing. And until the next video, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.